Okay, can you hear me online?
Yes, Bhante.
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, good. Okay, so we can start. We'll do the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the Fully Enlightened One. Okay, so this morning when we had the little chanting ceremony, we chanted the Mangala Sutta. And this is what I'm going to be using as the basis for the program for the retreat over this weekend for the talks. The Mangala Sutta is one of the most popular suttas or discourses of the Buddha in the Theravada tradition. And in most monasteries, it's probably chanted every day or several times a week. And when people need special blessings, for example, if they're starting a new job, they'll go to the temple, ask the monks to chant the Mangala Sutta. If they have a kid wants to get into a good college, they'll go to the temple and ask the monks to chant the Mangala, to do some chanting, and the monks will chant the Mangala Sutta. So it's used as a kind of auspicious text for blessing purposes. But the way I've looked at this sutta, I've seen that it could be understood as a kind of what I call a ground plan for the best life, the ideal life. And it encompasses so many different aspects of life, both for lay people and monastics. So it combines them both within a single formulation or a single ground plan. And the special, let's say, the benefits of the Mangala Sutta. Let me bring up a file. Okay, I hope for the people in the back that this will be visible, but I'm going to read what I have here. So first we have the meaning of the word Mangala. Probably for people coming from an Indian background, they'll understand this word. Generally, it has a sense of what is auspicious, what brings blessings, what brings benefit, what leads to well-being and happiness. And what I say about the Mangala Sutta is that it lays out in a series of 38 mangalas, 38 blessings, the building blocks of the good life, the things that bring blessings or benefits. And there are three kinds of benefits or blessings to which the Buddha's teachings lead. And I use this as a sort of framework for an anthology I compiled years ago called In the Buddha's Words. So we have the good or benefit here and now, the blessings that pertain to this present life, even worldly success, gaining respect from others, promoting cordial relationships with others, promoting harmonious family life, the factors that conduce to an equitable, just, peaceful society, and even to a peaceful world. So that is the benefit pertaining to the here and now, to the present life. Then we have the good or benefit pertaining to future lives. Because in Buddhism, we don't believe that at death everything comes to an end, but the body perishes, but the stream of consciousness moves on from this life to another life. And so the mangalas of the laid out in the Mangala Sutta show the factors that create the causes and conditions for a fortunate rebirth, for a happy rebirth by the creation of wholesome karma, the type of karma that leads to good fortune in future lives. And then towards the end of the Mangala Sutta, we find stated very concisely the blessings or the factors that lead to the ultimate or supreme good, which can be considered the ultimate blessing. and that will be the attainment of enlightenment, the destruction of the asavas, the ground or fundamental defilements, the attainment of nibbana, liberation from the round of samsara, repeated birth and death. And I sort of laid out some of the characteristics of the series in the Mangala Sutta. So when you take them all together, you could see, at least from a Buddhist point of view, that they're fairly exhaustive. That viewed together, they provide a holistic picture of the good life, very comprehensive picture. And then there is a kind of sequence in the factors of the Mangala Sutta, which I'm going to show when we come to the ground plan, that they unfold in a progressive sequence by which the earlier mangalas or blessings, more or less, not always exactly, but roughly, serve as the basis for those that follow. So one group of factors builds upon the other. And in a way, the next self-catalyzing, this is just a consequence of number two, that each stage contributes to the emergence of the next stage. Again, this is approximate. Don't try to look at all of the details, but in a general way, each stage contributes to the unfolding of the next stage. Then the factors laid out in the Mangala Sutta, we say that they're multidimensional in that they cover many different spheres of human life: the personal and interior, family life, the community, the society, and the spiritual and transcendent dimension of human life. And then these factors are, we could say, are universal in that as general principles, they can be applied virtually to any culture, any country, and any period of time. Of course, when you get to the specifics that we find in some of the suttas, they're rather tied to the culture of ancient India, but sort of the general principles that underlie these mangalas or blessings have a kind of universal application. And then the sixth factor that I have here is that they are practical and that they're all relevant to our lives. They're not just mere doctrine, not merely theoretical or abstract philosophy, but they provide guidelines to right living. And when we implement them, you find that they give dignity to our lives, something very important, especially at this time when human life is almost being degraded and treated as dispensable, disposable. But this is the way to establish a sense of inner dignity, to gain some sense of purpose and meaning that will enrich our lives in ways that cannot be matched by worldly gains like wealth, power, high status, and so forth. Yeah, I'll be sharing these files later. After the retreat, they'll go out to everybody, but I keep them secret before then, because if I send them out, then nobody will come for the retreat. They think, I have all the materials, so why travel to Zhuangyan Monastery? Okay. Okay, so let us now look at the ground plan. I'm going to increase the size. Oops, too much. How about in the back? Okay, I see people can see, but I think I could boost it a little bit more. Okay, so we have the first verse, after we have the setting where the text says the Buddha is dwelling at Anathapindika's park. Then a deity comes in the night and asks him the question. The question is, what is truly auspicious? What is truly a mangala? course, in India, in the ancient times, there was the idea that a mangala or blessing is when you come out of your house in the morning, if you see a particular flower blossoming, that's a mangala, or a particular bird flying across the sky or chirping in the trees, that's a mangala. Or in this country, people, I mean, I don't like this, but they have a rabbit's foot they hang in their car as a kind of safety, personal protection. So those are in conventional society, that's considered a mangala, a blessing. But this deity is asking the Buddha, what is mangalam uttamang? What is really the highest blessing? And then the Buddha is going to lay out his unfolding ground plan for the good life. And so we start off, as we're going to see, with what I call in verse 2, with proper orientation, cultivating the conditions for discretion. Discretion is the ability to distinguish good and bad, right and wrong, to get a kind of, call it a moral compass in leading one's life. Then verse 3, in this scheme, I called establishing secure foundations. And these will be the inner and outer requisites for success in life, success in the both in the material and the spiritual sense. And then verse 4, I call preparations, training oneself for success in life. So we have several factors here. And then verses 5 and 6, I describe I put on the heading, leading a virtuous life in the world. So verse 5, the focus is on fulfilling one's responsibilities within the family. And verse 6 sort of expands this, becoming a pillar of society, being of benefit to society. And then with verse 7, and this is where I see a transition taking place. Now we're moving from, say, fulfilling a virtuous life within the mundane dimensions of the world, now moving in the direction of world transcendence, entering on the path to liberation, which begins with personal ethics. In a way, this repeats some of the factors mentioned earlier, but the way I see it, and I'll explain later, is sort of boosting them or elevating them to a different level, to a higher level. So we have the personal ethics, then developing a deeper spiritual life. And this is by cultivating inner virtues and pursuing certain practices that lead to the emergence of wisdom. So the inner virtues would be developing reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude. And then in the next verse, patience and being amenable to advice. And then the factors that lead to the development of wisdom, I actually would reverse the sequence a little bit and say the seeing of renunciants, which means like going to the monastery or center to see renunciants or monastics. And when you see monastics, you don't only see them, but you get the chance to hear the Dhamma. And then after you hear the Dhamma with your friends or Dhamma companions, or even with the teachers, you have the chance to discuss the Dhamma. So those are the factors that lead to the emergence of right view, right understanding, which is the first factor in the Noble Eightfold Path. And then the next stage I call the ascent towards realization, the movement towards enlightenment and liberation. So here we have austerity, the spiritual life in the broad sense of the Noble Eightfold Path. And when that comes to maturity, there comes the direct vision of the Dhamma, the seeing of the noble truths and the realization of Nibbana. And then the verse 11 is this, I call the stage of fulfillment. And this is after completing all of the previous stages and reaching the realization of Nibbana. So this is like living with the Nibbanic realization in the world. And then the last verse is just the conclusion, which sort of celebrates all of the factors that came before. So that is a sort of scheme or outline of the sutta. And so now we're going to move into the individual factors. So let me go to my next. And the way I like to do this is by collecting suttas from here and there within the sutta from the Sutta Pitaka. I think that's this file. Okay, so the sutta begins, Evang me sutang ek. So it starts off at night because it, according to the text, deep in the night, this is when everybody else has retired, gone to sleep, the Buddha still remains awake. And at that time, when everything is quiet, there's no hustle and bustle at the monastery, then the devas, the deities, have their chance to come to visit the Buddha and ask questions. And so at the beginning of the sutta, one deity comes to the Buddha and says, Bahudeva manusacha mangalani achintayung akankamana sotanang bruhi mangalamuttamang. So many devas and human beings have pondered the question, what is a true blessing? So desiring welfare, desiring well-being, desiring security. So please tell me the supreme blessing, mangalamuttamang. And then the Buddha now begins his reply with, this is verse 2 in the sutta, asevena cha balanang panditanang cha sevena puja cha pujaniyanang etang mangalamuttamang. So we have three factors here, not to associate with fools. Maybe in English the word fool sounds rather derogatory. We'll just say foolish people, deluded people. To associate with the wise people, with the pandita, and to honor, to venerate those worthy of veneration. And you saw in the outline that I laid down just before that the purpose, the way I see the purpose of these three factors is to plant within us, particularly if you see this as sort of the guidance for a young person setting out in life, though it could also apply to older people, to provide, to lay the foundations for the emergence of a sense of discretion. And what is meant by discretion is the ability to distinguish what is right, what is wrong in regard to conduct, the ability to understand what are good qualities and what are bad or harmful qualities of the mind. What is the right way of life to follow? What is the wrong way of life to follow? And so discretion is that very, very essential factor that enables us to make the right moral decisions, particularly when we encounter conflicting situations between where there's a temptation to pursue things that will maybe promote short-term benefits and or that will lead to a kind of worldly success and achievements, and another course of action which requires some capacity for relinquishing immediate gratification for long-term benefit. And so discretion is that inner moral sense, and our inner moral sense, to some extent, from a Buddhist point of view, we would say that it is a product of our conditioning from previous lives. But in this life, it also depends to a very high degree on our association, the people that we associate with, the people that we look up to, the people that we turn to for advice and guidance. And so if we associate with foolish people, with people who are just dedicated to worldly benefits, mundane benefits, without a clear moral sense, inner moral sense, that could lead us astray. Whereas if we associate with wise people, we look up to them, we receive guidance from them, and we're able to, willing to listen to their advice, that will help us to follow the right course in life. And so here, to open this, I took a sutta where the Buddha speaks about right association. So he says, people are twofold, those to be associated with and those not to be associated with. And why is that said? Okay, so if one knows of a person, when I associate with this person, unwholesome qualities increase in me and wholesome qualities decline, diminish, then one shouldn't associate with such a person. But if one knows of a person, when I associate with that person, unwholesome qualities decline in me and wholesome qualities increase, then one should associate with such a person. So that is why this is said. And I found this to be very, very true. You know, in my own life, even as a monk, I remember, this goes back years ago, when I was in Sri Lanka, there was another Western monk there. I'm not going to mention the country or any names, but he would, whenever we would meet together, he would always start speaking critically about other monks, or critically about other places, and sometimes mockingly and ridiculing other monks behind their back. And what I found is that by associating with him, that tendency started to arise in my own mind. I started to become excessively critical of others, looking for the faults of others rather than trying to look for their good qualities. And so I realized that I had to keep a little distance from that person. We remained to some extent friends, but I tried to protect myself from that tendency to start becoming a fault finder the way he was. Okay, so now another sutta, the Buddha elaborates on what are the qualities of the fool. He's one who has three qualities: bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. Of course, we might not be able to know the mental conduct of the person, but the states of mind usually manifest in the way they behave, their bodily action, their verbal action. So that is the way you know who is a fool. And then we have the three, this is just an elaboration. So the fool is one who thinks bad thoughts, speaks bad words, and behaves badly with the body. And so it's by means of his behavior that you're able to determine that this person is a fool, a asapurisa, a bad person. So that's how you know, can determine who is a bad person on the basis of the person's conduct, even if you don't know the thoughts, but you can determine from speech and action. And then how do you know who is a wise person? Again, there are the three qualities: good bodily conduct, good speech, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct. Again, you might not know the thoughts or mental states of a person, but from their behavior, even sometimes the deportment, and from their speech, you can determine who is a good person, a wise person. And again, this is elaborated in the same way. The wise person is one who thinks well, speaks well. Excuse me. and acts well. And with this passage, we come to the crucial test. Yeah, this is a very important passage. So this, the Buddha begins by saying that there are four kinds of deeds. So one kind of deed is disagreeable to do. It's not pleasant. You don't want to do it. And you can determine in advance that if you engage in that kind of action, that will be harmful in the long range. There, yeah, just it occurred to me as an example of this, I have to say, you know, young 14-year-old kid sees adults smoking cigarettes. And so I think I have to be an adult. So I'm going to steal some of my mother's cigarettes and go out and smoke. Well, actually, at that time, I don't really think that it's harmful. It's disagreeable, but somehow it does have the agreeable side to it. It makes you think, now I'm not a kid anymore. Now I'm an adult. So you persist in that. Anyway, so there's disagreeable deed, which is harmful. Then there's a deed that's disagreeable to do, something difficult to do, but that you have some idea will prove beneficial. Then there's the deed that's agreeable to do, but that will prove harmful in the long range. And there's a deed that's agreeable to do, but that will, in the long run, it will turn out to be beneficial. Now, the first and fourth generally are not the means for distinguishing who is a foolish person, who is a wise person. Because if something is disagreeable to do and is going to be harmful, then generally both any sensible person would avoid it. So a foolish person will avoid it, a wise person will avoid it. And then when you come to the fourth case, a deed that's agreeable to do and that will prove beneficial. So this is something that should be done on both grounds. And so this is something that any sensible person would do because it's enjoyable when you do it and it's beneficial. So it's like if somebody has a kind of sweet drink, which is very nutritious, maybe a fruit smoothie. Yeah, so the fruits are very healthy and the taste is very pleasant. And so you want to drink the smoothie because you like it and it will be healthy for the body. Okay, but now this is where we find the sort of acid test for distinguishing the foolish person and the wise person. There are some things that are disagreeable to do, but that will prove beneficial. And so the sutta says, in this case, one could understand who is a fool and who is a wise person, since the fool doesn't reflect that even though this deed is disagreeable, hard to do, but still it will prove beneficial. And so the fool doesn't do that deed and it's harmful. But the wise person reflects in that way. He does that deed and it proves beneficial. Like let us take maybe example can be, okay, just sitting in meditation and doing mindfulness of breathing. Not that it's so disagreeable, but you have to sit with crossed leg and the mind naturally sort of runs out to find enjoyable things, television programs, videos on the internet, talking to friends. And so to sit quietly and to just try to focus on the in and out breathing. Of course, if somebody has a natural tendency towards samatha, towards samadhi, they'll quickly be able to go into a concentration. But for most of us, it can be a rather tedious and boring process. But we know that it's beneficial. We take the Buddha's word for it. And as we persist in this practice over a long time, we start to see the benefits. And so based on our understanding of the benefits, then we will undertake something that might be difficult and disagreeable. But in time, with patience, persistence, confidence, trust, we gain the benefits, and then we realize that that long and difficult process of cultivation was truly worthwhile. Okay, then we have the deed that's agreeable, but that will prove harmful. So again, this is where you could understand who is the fool and who is the wise person. The fool doesn't reflect that even though this deed is agreeable, still it will be harmful. So they do this deed, but the wise person reflects and avoids that deed. So somebody says, okay, come, let's go out drinking tonight, or I don't know, because I don't live in the world. I don't know what are the kinds of, or now I have to say, terrible thing, getting guns to enjoy owning guns, or participating in some of these kind of political rallies, which sometimes can turn violent. In any case, we want to avoid things that we might be enjoyable. So you go out with some friends and for a night of heavy drinking, but if you persist in that, it will eventually prove harmful. Okay, I just have some verses from the Dhammapada. I want to leave some time for questions. Let me see the schedule. Okay, I think we do have time. Okay, so I have some verses from the Dhammapada. Yeah, there are 2 chapters in the Dhammapada. And if you don't know the Dhammapada, you can easily find it online and download it. It's a collection of verses which are ascribed to the Buddha, or probably some of them were composed at a slightly later time on various topics, about 24 chapters, 27 chapters. And one chapter is called the chapter on the fool, and another chapter right after that is the chapter on the wise person. So these are verses from the chapter of the wise person, emphasizing right association. So if you find a person who points out your faults and criticizes you, follow such a wise person as you would a guide to hidden treasures. It is always better and never worse to cultivate such an association. Yeah, so sometimes when you associate with a spiritual teacher, they will sort of examine your character, your actions, and they'll sometimes, because they have a discerning eye, they might find faults and then criticize you, sometimes even test you in ways to manifest your faults. And then they'll point out your faults and urge you to correct them. And even though that is something disagreeable, unpleasant, because we don't want to see our faults, we don't want to see them manifest. But when you find somebody who will criticize you and point out your faults, that's very, very valuable, because then you see what are sometimes the deep and hidden forces of the mind that are driving you that you're not aware of. But when they're brought in front of you, then you have the chance to recognize them and then to change your ways. Like I give example from my own life. My first Buddhist teacher when I was in graduate school, he was a monk from Vietnam, and he used to do things deliberately to make me get angry. And he did this because he saw that I had an easy tendency to get angry. And so he would do the things a little bit to provoke me. And then I would get really angry. And then he would point out, you are angry. No, I'm perfectly calm, perfectly, very kind, gentle person. No, you get angry very easily. And also, yeah, even though had gone through a course of Buddhist studies in Vietnam, I had read a few books of D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts at that time. Alan Watts was a kind of Anglo-American writer on Zen Buddhism, basically an interpreter of D.T. Suzuki, the Japanese writer on Zen. So sometimes when my teacher would say things about Buddhism, and based on my reading of Alan Watts, I would contradict him. We would get into these arguments. And I was like so convinced that I am right and he's wrong. And then he would tell me, you have to get over that tendency always to cling to this idea, I am right and the other person is wrong. And so that was very helpful to sort of bring that quality to that character trait to my attention. Because you can go around with it, for at that time, maybe for 20 years or so. I'm leaving aside 2 or 3 years as a baby. So starting from the age of 3 or 4, thinking I'm always right, the other person is wrong. So he would teach me, you have to reflect every day. I might be right, I might be wrong. That doesn't matter. What's important is what is true, not to be right. Okay, so then it just continues. Don't associate with evil companions, associate with good friends, seek the fellowship of the noble ones. And this reminds me of a passage I didn't include here, but I should have. This is where Ananda, the Buddha's disciple, comes to the Buddha and says, in my understanding, good friendship, noble friendship, is one half of the spiritual life. Then the Buddha says, don't say that, Ananda, don't say that. Good friendship, it's not one half the spiritual life, but it's the entirety, the whole of the spiritual life. Okay, now we have 3 kinds of persons. So the person not to be associated with, the person to be associated with, and the person to be associated with and serve with honor and respect. So who should not be associated with? The person who's inferior to yourself by way of conduct, concentration, or meditation and wisdom. So this is more in the monastic context. So that person should not be associated with and serve except out of sympathy and compassion. So you can associate with that person, but with some caution, being careful, and doing so because you want to uplift that person, not to sort of submit to that person and come under their influence, their negative influence. Then the person to be associated with is the one who is more or less similar to yourself with regard to conduct, concentration, and wisdom. And then the person to be associated with and serve with honor and respect is the person superior to yourself with regard to conduct, concentration, and wisdom. Because when you associate with that person, it helps to improve your own conduct, concentration, and wisdom. Yeah, there are more passages. Oh, it's only, okay, I still have some time. Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's some verses which show how a person is influenced by the people that they associate with. And it uses some nice similes. So if you take a piece of fragrant grass, this is kusa grass, and you wrap a rotten fish in that kusa grass, and then later you remove the fish, but that fragrant grass will now give off a rotten odor. So that is like what happens when you associate with fools. You pick up the influence, the negative or harmful influence of the foolish people. But then if you take jasmine, jasmine is a sweet, fragrant flower, and you use some leaves of a tree and you wrap that around the jasmine, then later you unfold the leaves of the tree, the leaves will still give off a sweet fragrance. And that's what happens, a simile to what happens when you associate with the wise. So you pick up their wholesome, beneficial, good influence. Oh, you'll get the file. This is a long passage on different types of friends that we find in great detail. But this is an important point now. You were speaking about determining who is a fool, who is a wise person. But this passage, sort of the message is, don't make hasty judgments. Sometimes you can't really determine quickly who is a fool, who is a wise person. Because here the text says that it's by dwelling together that the quality of a person's conduct can be known. And this happens only over a long time, not casually. So sometimes you have a casual acquaintance with somebody and you form a negative judgment about them. But if you associate with them over a long time, then you see that they're really a good person. Maybe they just have a rough manner, but they can be very kind and generous and compassionate and helpful. Whereas somebody else can have a very sweet, ingratiating manner. They seem very kind or very pure. And when you get to associate with them over a long time, then you start to see that that sweet manner is just a deceptive appearance. But inside, the character can be quite harmful, quite corrupt. So that's how you determine the quality of their conduct. And by dealing with them over a long time, their integrity can be known. That is by dealing with them that you can know their integrity, their moral integrity. Again, only over a long time, not casually. And you have to be attentive and you have to use discernment, the ability to sort of fathom the quality of a person's character, to see whether they're a person of integrity or deceptiveness. And then it's in misfortune that their fortitude can be known. And then the fourth is by conversation, by discussion, that their wisdom can be known. And again, only over a long time, not casually, by one who is attentive, not by one who is inattentive, and by one who is wise, not by one who is unwise. Yeah, so this covers the first two mangalas, that is, to avoid associating with fools, to associate with the wise. Then the third one is to honor those worthy of honor, to venerate those worthy of veneration. And the way the commentary explains that is that one honors the Buddha and the great disciples of the Buddha. And within a general Buddhist social, cultural context, lay people show veneration to, to monastics, to monks and nuns, but always do so, not judging them as individuals as such, because we all have our faults, but as sort of imperfect representations of the ideal Sangha, maybe the Arahata Sangha, the community of the noble ones. And then one should honor, in a traditional culture, the children honor their parents and their elders, and students honor their teachers. And the reason that we show veneration to those who are truly worthy of veneration is that this is a way, I say, of attuning our own character to the character of those who we take as our models, as our ideals. And maybe it can compare this to, if you play the guitar and your guitar tune, and you don't have such a good ear, musical ear, then you take a good guitar that's in proper tune, and another person has a guitar, they'll play a string, then you listen, and then you start tightening the strings of your guitar until you get your guitar or violin, whatever, piano, into proper tune. So it's like you take the properly tuned instrument as the model for tuning up your own instrument. And so that is the way we take those worthy of veneration and we show veneration to them, respect by our thoughts, our speech, our behavior as a way of attuning our character to their characters. Okay, so I wanted to leave some time if any questions come up out of anything that I've covered so far. And first, I give priority to the people who have come in person. So please, the way to do this is to raise the hand, and Yo Rong, she'll pass around the microphone.
And I've read some of the suttas as well that where they say to avoid people who are hypercritical. I mean, it's all based on not necessarily intent, but result, I guess. Because you started off just by saying how you knew a monk who used to, but I mean, his intent there was really to self-aggrandize, to make himself seem better in your eyes,
Yeah.
or maybe he was currying favor with you. I don't know if he was necessarily trying to make those other people look bad, but he was trying to make himself look better. So I'm in this middle path that we're on. Like, how do we know? So there's the Dhammapada 76 saying you should seek out someone who is
Yeah.
critical, but there are also suttas saying people that are critical where it leads to discursive speech and separation. So where's the middle path? Where's the
I see.
discernment?
Maybe let me see if I understand the question correctly. So you have people who will criticize others. So how do you know whether they're sort of criticizing others just sort of randomly out of a sort of denigrating frame of mind, or whether they're speaking words of criticism because they want to help? Is that the point?
Yeah, can you even tell? I mean, you don't know their intent. You can guess to their intent.
Yeah,
but
sometimes I think you just have to
just result.
judge intuitively.
Okay.
You get a sense. And generally, when a person wants to criticize you in order to help you improve yourself, they will frame their criticism in the appropriate way. In fact, later we're going to come to some of the standards or criteria that the Buddha lays down when you want to speak to a person to correct their faults. What are the ways to go about doing that?
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay, so I see somebody in the back. Yeah. And good, when a person gets a mic, if you would just say your name first. Though my memory is for names is not perfect, but at least I get to know the name.
My name is Ron.
Ron.
This is actually a question on last night's talk, if you would accept that.
From last night.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Just something quick that struck me, that the Buddha said there are many men and women who have not abandoned pleasure, who abide in pleasure,
Yeah.
that have also reached the goal.
Yeah.
And to me, I thought that, or at least personally, like my mind struggles with that because with this pleasure, this craving. And so I'm wondering if you can help me sort that out.
Okay. He didn't say that they've reached the goal. What he says, he's distinguishing like two groups of the lay disciples. So those who reach the state, there are these 4 stages of realization, which I'm going to come to in more detail later on in the course of this retreat. So the highest stage is this is the stage of final liberation, arhatship. And that is, in that sutta, spoken of only in relation to monastics, to the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. The third stage is the stage of non-returner, which is the stage when one has cut off what are called the 5 lower fetters. Amongst them is the fetter of sensual desire, sensual craving. So those are the lay disciples clothed in white who are leading lives of celibacy because they no longer have sensual desire. Okay, but then he speaks about the lay disciples, male and female lay disciples, who are not observing celibacy. So they would be married, living a married life, and so they can still have sexual relations, but they have cut off at least the three lower fetters, which are the fetters of, well, and I'll come to them later, but the view of self, doubt about the teaching, and the wrong grasp of rules and observances or rites and rituals. And so they are living by sila, by virtuous conduct, but they don't have to observe the vow of celibacy. But of course, since they're stream enterers or once returners, they'll have reduced sensual desire, but they don't have to observe strict abstinence the way those at the higher stages do. Okay, I see a person back. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. My name is Yus.
Use?
Yes. I have a question about verse 4 about Bahu Sachan Cha Sipan Cha. And that's
Bahusa Chancha?
verse 4 when it talks about developing skills.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that. Yeah, the questions now should be directed, they can be directed to things I covered last night or this morning.
Yeah. So this is verse 4 of Mangala Sutta.
Yeah,
Yeah. So can I ask a question about that?
you could ask the question, but I'm going to come to that verse later.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah, I'm going to be going through the sutta verse by verse.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hi, Bante. This is Heinz Sita. Is there any significance to the Mangala Sutta being initiated by a deity as opposed to, by a question from Ananda or
Yeah,
a lay practitioner?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't really know the answer to that. Yeah, I just don't know.
I mean, is it maybe hinting at the fact that this is a more comprehensive, broader reach?
Maybe not necessarily.
Mm.
I don't know. It's just a way of giving a certain setting to the sutta. It could also be a way, this is maybe a little bit heterodox opinion, that the sutta maybe was not actually spoken in this way by the Buddha, but it's compiled at a later time to bring together many elements of the teaching into a systematic framework. And then sort of to justify it, then it becomes presented as a dialogue between a deity and the Buddha, possibly. Okay, so what, did we have the question there? Okay,
Hi, my name is John.
John.
Yes, I have a question about Dhammapada 76, that if you find somebody who points out your faults, you should associate with them.
Yeah.
In my experience, people typically don't point out my faults until I've already associated with them a lot. And so they're comfortable with me. And so what are some other ways that I could identify people who, if I would get to know them better and they would get more comfortable with me, then they would be willing to point out my faults? Are there other markers that you can look for?
Again, I think you have to sort of judge that intuitively through, as this other sutta says, through relatively long association.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in that way that you can determine who is pointing out your faults with a good mind, a wish to benefit you and to help you uplift yourself, and those who are pointing out faults or just sort of angrily harping on faults.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So one has to use one's, just again, your discretion to
Mm-hmm.
distinguish who is a reliable person, a suitable person to rely on, and who should be avoided because they're hypercritical and maybe
Mm-hmm.
have harmful intentions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then I thought I saw somebody. You have to raise the hand maybe higher. Oh, I see. So you're going to speak. Okay. So we have
Hi, I'm Andy.
Andy?
It's not. Oh, this is not allowed.
Andy, was that the name?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is kind of loud. It wasn't really a question, but I made an association. There's a saying that goes, discretion is the better part of valor. I think you might have heard of it before. And it reminded me of like doing something that's, you said it's doing something that's disagreeable, but better in the long run. Would you think that requires some kind of courage in a way?
Oh, definitely, definitely. In fact, I had, maybe I didn't
I think you
mention
might
this
have
when
mentioned
when I
that.
came to that, but let me just go back. I had some notes here. I said, yeah, so I said for when there's something that's disagreeable, but that will prove beneficial. So this can be understood by way of moral courage, that is a willingness to take personal risks to promote the greater good, especially the greater good for others. So this can be understood sometimes, like when in the social context where you have to sort of stand up, maybe some people are being persecuted, harmed, um, discriminated against in unfair ways. And you realize that there's a moral challenge of standing up to defend them, to stand up for justice and for the well-being. So this requires some kind of moral courage, a willingness to take personal risks to promote the greater good. And then
Oh,
on the other hand, number 3, I say, this is where you encounter something that's agreeable to do, but that threatens to prove harmful in the long range. So this, I would say, emphasizes the need for moral caution. For when you see that something is likely to lead to long-term harm, then you exercise caution, you avoid it.
just like, but let's say there's someone that caused you mental discomfort, but you know that by associating that person, it promotes better long-term results. Is that some kind of, that requires like also some kind of right thing courage also, right?
Yeah, I would say even though you might be uncomfortable
Around
associating
that,
with a certain
yeah.
person, but if you see that it brings benefit in the long range, in the long run, then you can associate or should associate with that person.
Despite the mental discomfort.
Yeah, yeah. But again, you have to use a very, very subtle kind of discretion to judge the situation. You don't want to cause too much discomfort to yourself if that really becomes debilitating, disabling. Okay, I think it's time for us to take a break now. Let me just check the schedule. Yeah, so from 10 to 10:20, we will take a break, a tea break. I think you can go to the dining hall. There'll be some tea. If you have to go to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom. But
Bhante, there is an online person raising hand.
where is that? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, but we do have to take the break. Yeah, I know that people will have many questions, but we just can't take all of them. Otherwise, we'll fall behind on a schedule. So maybe later you'll have a chance to ask the question. Okay, so please be back at 10:20 on the Eastern time. People online? Okay, so
Yes.
they can,
I can hear you.
Bante.
you can hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
Bante.
Okay. And you could see the screen okay?
Yes, thanks, Bante. Everything is great.
Okay.
You need to share, Bante. You haven't started sharing yet.
Okay, thank you for reminding me. I thought that it.
Oh, you're
it's
you're
shared.
sharing the screen. We can see the screen.
Okay, so the screen is shared.
Yes.
Okay, this is getting very complicated. In the early days, I remember we had the Abhidhamma retreats from 2013 to 2019. No Zoom, people were all here. It's very simple. Now have to divide the mind into two different domains. Okay, so now we've established or laid down the first factors in the Mangala Sutta, the factors that are intended to create this or to promote the development of the sense of discretion through right association and through right veneration. And so the next verse I call establishing secure foundations. And I have a way of dividing. There are three divisions or three mangalas, three blessings in this section, and I distinguish them. Yeah, first I'll go through the way I distinguish them. So residing in a suitable locality, I call the external present foundation, since it's something external to ourselves, like we have, in a sense, at least no control over the place where we're born, where we grow up, though later, of course, we can move to other places. But it's external to us, and it's present. It's something that's present in this life right now. Okay, but this next mangala is called merits done in the past, pube cha kata punyata. And this I call the internal past foundation, because this is referring to things that we've done in the past, even in past lives. Of course, in the present, we have to go on creating more meritorious conditions. But looking at the past merits, that's something already established. And then the third mangala in this section is atasama panidi, which means right resolution, right personal resolution. And that I call a present internal foundation. Yeah, I call it the internal present foundation, because it's the resolution or determination of something internal to ourselves, and it's something that we do in the present. So let us see what is involved here. So residing in a suitable locality, from the standpoint of a Dhamma practitioner, this would be a place where you have access to sources of teaching on the Dhamma, places to practice, the opportunity to associate with good Dhamma friends, to learn from good teachers. And in a way, this particular factor has been largely transcended by this development of the sort of electronic means of communication. So dwelling almost any place in the world, you can get access to some floods and floods of Dhamma teaching. Sometimes it's too much in excess. And almost in any place in the world, some exceptions, you can find access to Buddhist monasteries, temples, meditation centers, Dhamma teaching centers. Maybe, as I said, some exceptions. If one is living in maybe Saudi Arabia, Iran, not much chance there. But if you're living in Africa, even in Uganda, I have a good friend, his name is Bhante Buddharakkhita. He's a Buddhist monk from Uganda, and he was ordained as a monk in the United States. He studied in the US with Bhante Gunaratna at the Bhavana Society in West Virginia. Now he's gone back to Uganda and he's established the Ugandan Buddhist Center. And he has quite a number of young Ugandan, both men and women, ordained as monks and nuns. So if you go to Uganda, you can learn Buddhism even there. Okay, so residing in a suitable locality. And of course, if you're living in the vicinity of Zhuangyan Monastery, you could have always the chance to come here to learn the Dhamma. But before the COVID era, I used to have my Saturday class here in the Kuan Yin Hall, and we used to get like usually 30, 35 people coming on Saturday mornings. Then for, I think, 3 years, 4 years, I didn't have any classes, any in-person classes. All the classes were over Zoom. Then 2023 decided to resume the in-person classes. I started in the library, and I think we started off getting about 4 people coming in person. But because we were using Zoom, so we were getting sometimes like 120. Now it's gone up to 140, 150 people coming by Zoom, but usually 6 to 8 people coming in person. But it doesn't really matter that much. Okay, so residing in a suitable locality. Next is merits done in the past. And this requires a little explanation about this word punya, which I think for Western people is somewhat a little bit off-putting. I even had some trouble with it myself, because the word merit sort of almost suggests that, like when we were in elementary school, the teacher has these cards, so they hand out cards. And if you do something good, then the teacher will could be a gold star or a shiny star or a silver star. And those are your merit cards. So you get the impression that there's sort of somebody, just find a seat, any seat that's available. That there's somebody looking over you who's pointing like golden stars or silver stars. And maybe if you do something bad, demerit, they put a dark X on your card. But it's not like that. So what is the meaning of merit? So when we engage in any kind of wholesome action, virtuous or good action, could be practicing generosity. I'll come in a while to the basis of merit. It creates a particular force in the mind, a kind of purifying force that we can also call wholesome karma. And that force of wholesome karma has the capacity, it's kind of our storage of well-being, our kind of spiritual wealth, which has the capacity to bring desirable results in the future. And the results that merit brings are both mundane and called world transcending. Did I have a note on merit here? No, but I'll just explain. Okay, so there are mundane results of meritorious deeds. So the mundane results would be like having a long lifespan. So wholesome karma contributes to having a long lifespan, good health, and from a more worldly point of view, to having relative prosperity, so you're not afflicted with oppressive poverty. But sometimes poverty can be an incentive for spiritual development. Merit creates the opportunities for getting a good education, good employment opportunities, strength and health, I mentioned, a pleasant appearance, good features, and so on. And merit is also the kind of, I call this the fuel for the spiritual life. So some people you could see when they sit to meditate, they easily make progress in their practice, whereas many of us have to stumble over a lot of hindrances and difficulties. So the reason why some people can make very quick and rapid progress is because of the accumulation of merit. And so the Buddha he's speaking now to the monks, And he says, do not be afraid of merit. That is a designation for happiness. So merit is what, how did this come? Okay. Merit is what brings happiness in various forms. And the ways to create merit, so the older texts, the canonical texts, mention 3 foundations of merit, 3 ways that we create merit. These are through giving, the practice of generosity. So when you give to, well, I'm going to come later in detail to explain generosity or giving. So the practice of giving, observing precepts, and then developing the mind in meditation, and particularly from the standpoint of merit, I would say the meditation subjects that are most conducive to merit from the standpoint of merit would be the divine abodes, the 4 Brahma Viharas, the meditations of metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. And also the recollections, the recollection of the 3 jewels of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So those are really very powerful, purifying impact on the mind. So those are the 3 bases of merit mentioned in the oldest texts. Then later texts elaborate by adding more bases of merit, which are in a way just extensions of the original 3. One is by doing service to others, being helpful to others. In a way, this is a manifestation of giving, not just giving material things, but giving help, service, and reverence, showing respect, particularly when we bow down and show veneration to the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and then sharing one's merits with others. This is what we do at the end of the day or at the end of our recitation. We share the merits. We do akasata cha bhumata. We invite the devas and nagas and other beings to rejoice in our merits. And in that way, we increase our own merits. It's like using a candle. We have a candle, and it's like inviting others to take their unlit candles and light their candles off our burning candle. And then the counterpart to that is rejoicing in the merits of others. So sometimes the mind has an innate, maybe competitive disposition. So we think like, I'm going to be, the most generous person. I will get my name up on the plaque, a person who's the benefactor of the community. Or if we're observing precepts, we think I'm going to observe more precepts or hold to them more strictly than others. And in meditation, we think I'm going to be the #1 Olympic champion meditator, surpassing others. And if we see others sort of sitting and we do 1 hour and they're still sitting, and my legs are killing me, but I'm not going to let them sit longer than me. So I'm going to compete with them. But this is the opposite attitude. Instead of having that competitive mind, the mind that wants to be #1, we're ready to rejoice in the merits of others, to rejoice in the good qualities, the virtues of others. And when we rejoice in the merits of others, that brings us merit. Because we now are replacing the competitive mind with a mind of kind of mudita, of altruistic joy, of rejoicing with others, attuning our own mind to the good of others. And then another bit, now we come 3 bases of merit, which are concerned with sort of sharpening our wisdom, developing our wisdom. One is listening to the Dhamma. So just when you listen to the Dhamma with the proper frame of mind, and later we're going to come to the right way to listen to the Dhamma, that is a source of merit. Also teaching the Dhamma, but you have to teach it with the right purpose, the right attitude, not for the purpose of name and fame and to get respect and offerings from others, but to share this precious teaching with others. So that then becomes a source of merit. And then correcting one's understanding. So this is through study, reflection, meditation, one tries to correct one's understanding of the Dhamma. So these are the ways that we can generate and create merit in the present. So the verse says, Pube Chakata Punyata, the meritorious deeds done in the past. So that is what we bring with us from previous lives into this one. But in this life, we have to begin creating merits to serve as our support, the foundation for later lives. And one of the ways in which we can strengthen our capacity to create merit is indicated by the third blessing mentioned here, the third Mangala, which is right resolution. And that's what I call the internal present foundation. And here I took a passage from a sutta in the middle length discourses about where there's a list of 44 kinds of determination that one could make, 44 kinds of resolution. But I don't suggest beginning with a lot of resolutions. But this is what my personal suggestion is. You see, our minds, or let's say our character, is the product of our thought formations. And the thought formations are the product of individual thoughts. And our thoughts can be guided by resolutions. So what I found very, very helpful going back to very beginning of my life as a Buddhist is every day to make a fixed number of resolutions, making it as part of the practice when ending the morning meditation practice. And what you do, here I'm going to be stepping on some toes, including my own, you find 3 faults or shortcomings within yourself, and you make the determination to overcome them or to develop the opposite quality. Okay, so you have maybe a tendency to be a little selfish or miserly. So you make a determination, I'm going to find the opportunity to practice giving or generosity, even if it's small donations to worthy purposes. Many, many worthy purposes you can find over the internet. Save the Children Foundation, International Rescue Committee, the World Food Program. I have an organization, a little plug, Buddhist Global Relief, providing food assistance to poor communities around the world. Oxfam, there are many. So even small donations. And once you start practicing giving, then you get the joy or delight of giving. And that encourages you to make more generous donations. So that's just one example. You make that determination. Tendency, as I said, to get angry easily. So determination, I'm going to remain patient under all conditions, even when provoked by others. Tendency to be lazy, you make the determination to be energetic, vigorous. If you see that you often have anger and ill will, you can make the determination to maybe to spend a certain amount of time, even 5 minutes a day, doing the meditation of loving kindness. And so it's through making 3 resolutions a day that you find, if you look back after 1 week, am I improving? No, I'm still the same, stuck in the same grooves. But don't lose heart, because you're really setting in motion the forces that are going to bring changes. Then 1 month, you look back, am I making any changes in myself? No, I'm still the sad sack. still, what's the expression? The flop, the failure. But other people are saying, wow, you seem much calmer. You seem happier. And then over time, you see, after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, you see that you're really making changes. Then you can maybe at that point, you could add some other resolutions. And so there's a list of 44 kinds of resolutions here. And as we go on, I'll show you some other types of resolutions that one could make. Yeah, and so you see these resolutions that you make on a daily basis, you just do it. It takes like 1 minute to make 3 resolutions, but you're planting a thought in the mind. And when you're doing that every day, the thought becomes what I call a thought formation, maybe a vitaka sankara. And then those thought formations build up their strength and they sort of weave together into almost like a textile or the fabric of the mind. And so in that way, you actually create your character through those individual resolutions. Just try it, you'll see over time. Okay, and now I'll try to go, let's see what the time is like. Yeah, we have quite a bit of time. Okay, so now we come to the next verse. So I call this verse preparations. So in a way, if we see this Mangala Sutta laying down a sort of ground plan for the good life, a path of life. So here we have the young person sort of preparing themselves for their life. And so we have, I think there are 3 mangalas here. Bahu sachansasi pancha vinayocha susikito subhasitacha yavacha. It seems I skipped over, maybe because there was not so many texts to illustrate the others. Okay, so we have abundant learning. And so here we have just a simple formula. And this is really concerned with the learning of the Dhamma. So here it says that usually it's speaking about a monk is one who learns much, remembers what he has learned, stores up what one has learned. One retains the teachings in mind, recites them verbally, mentally examines them, and penetrates them with insight. So this is concerned with the learning of the Dhamma. And this is like the traditional way of learning, particularly in ancient times, in the Buddha's time. Like we didn't have written text. So to learn the teaching, you have to go to a monastery where the Buddha is living, where there are learned monastics. And the word that means learning is satya. It's not the word for truth, but it's derived from the word sutta, which means what one has heard. So you have to learn, you have to go to a place where you listen. You don't have access to written text. So you have to listen carefully, and then you bear in mind, you remember what you learn and store it up in the sense of accumulate the knowledge, retaining them in mind. And one way to imprint the teachings on the mind is to recite them verbally. So this is a practice that's done in the Buddhist countries of Asia. When the monks learn something during the day, then in the evening, they usually have like walkways outside in the open air, and they'll memorize the text by walking back and forth. Maybe they'll keep a printed copy by their side, but they'll recite verbally and then check themselves by looking at the printed copy. So that is a way to learn the contents, but to gain understanding, you have to examine, investigate the meaning of the teaching. and then penetrate them with insight. So that is really speaking here about the learning of the Dhamma. But as far as abundant learning, my understanding is that the text here is referring to learning many different disciplines. And in the culture of ancient India, that would be the secular branches of learning. Let's see if I could remember what they would be. Grammar is considered very important in traditional Indian culture, particularly those who learn Sanskrit would learn Sanskrit grammar, Pali grammar, then learning logic, an important branch of learning just for everybody to study to some extent would be medicine, in the sense of knowing what herbs that grow in the particular environment can be used as medicine. Grammar, logic, medicine.
Mathematics.
What was that? Mathematics. Today, mathematics. In the ancient times, maybe those who are to be employed in the king's service would learn mathematics in order to count the money that the income.
Maybe the moral values.
Astrology. Excuse me? I think you have to use the microphone.
No, I was just saying, in ancient India, quite a bit of the astrology was based on mathematics. So
Oh, I see.
astrologers would
That
know
astrology is based on mathematics. Okay, so today, let's say abundant learning. What do you get in the sort of basic college course? I think we had literature and composition,
Mathematics.
um,
Mathematics.
science, mathematics. I mentioned history, I think we had sociology, science, mathematics. Something is missing, philosophy or religion.
History.
I mentioned history. Okay, so learning anyway, those types of subjects and a foreign language. Yeah, that is what's really lacking now in American education system, learning foreign languages. You know, people in European countries can know like 4 or 5 languages, speaking them fluently. I have a friend named Dhamadipa from the Czech Republic. Okay, he was born in Czechoslovakia, so of course he knew Czech. At that time, it was part of the Soviet bloc, so he had to learn Russian. He went to Germany and learned German. He went to work in a kibbutz in Israel, so he learned Hebrew. Then he went to study in France, so he learned I think it's Sorbonne or Paris University, so he learned French. He studied Chinese to the point where he could speak Chinese fluently. He went to Japan and somehow picked up some Japanese, then went to India to study Buddhism in India. So he learned Hindi, Sanskrit, came to Sri Lanka and learned Pali. He then went to Myanmar, to Burma, but he said, I'm not going to learn Burmese. Yeah, but we in America, even myself, I picked up some literary languages, but spoken languages, not that much. Okay, so yeah, so this is abundant learning, Bahu Sachancha, and Sipancha is to learn some craft, some skill, so that you can learn a livelihood. We don't have to go through the different types of skills. But then we come to, this is an important factor mentioned, Bahu Sachansa Sipancha Su. Bahu Sachansa Sipancha. Oh, somehow I passed over. How did I manage to skip it? Yeah, I'm skipping Sipan. Sipan is some kind of skill. either an artistic skill, technical skill, some way to earn a living. But the next is a code of discipline by which to live, training oneself in accordance with a code of discipline. And normally in the Buddhist context, the word used actually in the verse is vinaya or vinaya, which takes on a more technical meaning of the code of monastic conduct, the code of monastic precepts. But my understanding in this particular framework, vinaya is not used with reference to the code of monastic discipline, but the code of discipline appropriate for a person living in the world, because this goes along with these factors like a good, abundant learning a craft. So I would say that this is just a simple code of ethical discipline to guide one in one's life in the world. Presumably, this would be the 5 precepts to abstain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, deceptive speech, and the use of intoxicants. But then the verse particularly singles out well-spoken speech, probably to underscore the importance of speech in a social framework, the social context. Since we know that speech plays just such a momentous role in the lives of our whole society. In this time of the election season, the news commentators pick up any statement that a candidate might make, often slicing them out of context in order to distort their position. And we're exposed to so many bombardments with so much speech over the social media. But even in an ancient society where we don't have these electronic communications, speech would have played such an important role. So the Buddha here takes out and emphasizes subhasita vacha, well-spoken speech. And so I took a couple of suttas that deal with well-spoken speech. So this one, here the text says that's when speech possesses 4 factors, it is well-spoken, not badly spoken. It is blameless and irreproachable by the wise. So what are the 4? And the first one seems a little bit like tautological. So what is well-spoken speech? A monk speaks only what is well-spoken, not what is badly spoken. Somehow I think the text might have been corrupted here because this doesn't elaborate what is meant by well-spoken speech. But again, this is for a monk who speaks only Dhamma, not non-Dhamma, speaks only what is pleasing, not what is displeasing, but there's going to be a qualification on this, and speaks only what is true, not falsehood, not lies. But now, the next passage I find to be more illuminating. So when speech possesses 5 factors, it is well-spoken, not badly spoken, and so on. So what are the 5? It is spoken at the proper time. So this is particularly, I think, the kind of speech that one uses when you're going to sort of criticize another person or to point out their faults. You have to find the right time to speak to them. Say, if they're sitting around at a table together with their friends, you don't come up to them and say, you did this, you shouldn't have done that. You're being lazy, you didn't wash the dishes, everybody is waiting for you to wash the dishes. You were supposed to prepare tea and serve tea while you're just sitting around and chatting all the time. You don't speak to them that's the wrong time. The right time would be when, or if they're in a rush, maybe they're going out to work, they have to meet a deadline, you don't stop them and start to speak to them, but you choose a time when they're alone, when they have some leisure, and then that is the time to speak. Then when you are going to rebuke them for something, you have to be sure that what they said is what you're going to say is true, relating to what is true. And even we find in the canonical texts, sometimes somebody will come to the Buddha and complain about a particular monk, you know, the Venerable so-and-so has been behaving in that way, then the Buddha will send a message to that monk and say, call the Venerable so-and-so and come to my presence. The Buddha doesn't begin right away by criticizing the monk, but the Buddha will say to that monk, it's said that you have been doing this, doing that. Is that true? Even though the Buddha will know that it's true, but the Buddha wants to get the monk that he's going to criticize, to rebuke, to admit that it's true, as a way of sort of making it a public knowledge that that monk's wrong behavior is admitted by the monk himself. Okay, so this applies also in your everyday life. When you want to criticize somebody for something, try to make sure that what you're going to point out is true. Okay, then when you speak gently, not roughly, and you speak in a way that will be beneficial to the person, in a way that will uplift them from their wrongdoing, to help them change their ways. And then I would say, what you do even before you speak, you set up the mind of loving kindness. Just for a few moments, you direct the thought, may this person be well, may they be happy, may they be safe. And then you can speak with the intention of benefiting them. So the text says, when speech possesses those 5 factors, it is well spoken, it is blameless and irreproachable by the wise. But this is interesting. You know, speech in earlier passages said that the speech should be pleasing, not displeasing. But that's not always the case. And this is the speech of the Buddha. This is a long passage in which the Buddha describes the speech that he doesn't utter and the speech that he does utter. And so I'm just taking the speech that the Buddha will use. He says, such speech that the Tathagata, that's a designation for the Buddha, knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, he'll utter that speech. But if it's unwelcome and disagreeable to others, so the speech can be displeasing, but he knows that it's beneficial. And so he knows the right time to use such speech. So he'll speak at the right time, but his speech will be true and correct. Certainly it's done with the intent, with a mind of loving kindness, and it's uttered in order to benefit the person, even though the speech is disagreeable to others. Sometimes the Buddha will pull up a misbehaving monk and criticize them. It really sounds sometimes a bit rough. You foolish person, you should not have done that, or should not be proclaiming that view. And it's displeasing to the person, but the Buddha does it because it's necessary. So that is one kind of speech that he uses. And the other kind is speech that he knows to be true, correct, and beneficial. And it's welcome and agreeable to others. And he knows the time, the right time to use such speech. And why is that? Because the Buddha has compassion for beings. I think that compassion applies particularly to the case of the speech which is disagreeable but beneficial to others. Okay, so I think that will cover the material that I had under this verse. And now we can use the rest of this period for questions. And let me give, this time I'll give priority to the online people. Okay, so let's see how I find them. Okay, so the way to pose questions is by using the hand symbol. Okay, so I see a number of hand symbols. So we'll start with Amy.
Yes, thank you, Bhante, for your teaching. I have a question that's related to the last talk about associating with people. let's say that if you're in a work situation that maybe the not so good person to be associated with happens to be people you have to work with, or that they might be your boss, what might be a good situation to handle that? And then you
Wait just a second, because the voice is coming through a little bit blurry. I wonder if there's a way I could get.
Is this any better?
Oh, I see.
If you can hear it, then we can't hear it.
Yeah. Okay. The other way, I can just temporarily stand out there. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay now, Bhante?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so my question has to do with the last talk about people you associate with. Let's say that there are people that aren't so great to be associated with, but you can't really avoid them because they're people you work with, or maybe your boss, your bosses. What might be a good way to handle that?
Okay, okay. Yeah, all I could say is that in situations like that where you're not in a position to even gently rebuke that person because maybe they're in a position of higher authority, then sometimes you just have to endure it with patience and equanimity. If it's a person who's roughly your peer, then of course, when you find the right opportunity, the right time, and if you have some kind of cordial relationship with them, then you might, speak to them gently and tell them that they're having an abrasive effect upon you. But there are other situations where you meet with these difficulties, and then it's just take it as an opportunity to develop patience and equanimity. Okay, well,
Thank you, Bhante.
We'll have to move on. So I think Susie in Pennsylvania.
Yes, Bhante.
Let me go out.
I will wait.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think I am combining my earlier question with also this teaching. I am personally in a situation where I am forced to live with someone who would be defined perhaps as deluded or foolish. And I wanted to ask a practice, but the idea, I have all this practice available to me, and there is the need for right speech involved in this. But the internal energy of anxiety, stress, etc., is so high that it does obstruct my use of the teaching. So
wait, it obstructs what?
It obstructs my retaining my memory, my storing up and bringing it forth. So I wanted to ask you for the practice or a practice, or specifically around this concept, trying to find my blessings in my lay life, of being accompanied for a lengthy period of time with someone who is deluded, and still being able to maintain my inner harmony and balance while trying to speak up at times and having explosions occur when not receptive, and sometimes being heard. But what's really challenging is my inner harmony and balance. But you just spoke of maintaining patience and equanimity, and so I was thinking, well, there's a piece of my answer, but can you just give a series of pointers, perhaps to all of us on to
Can I
remember
give a what?
a series of reminders of the practices to handle oneself.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, sir.
So some practices to handle oneself in a situation like that.
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting a message. Your speaker is not working properly. Just cancel. It says continue recording. Okay.
Oh, recording could be a problem.
Maybe because this thing was put in.
It probably couldn't hear you when you stepped away, Bhante, because
Okay,
you were
can you
not.
hear me?
I can hear you now, but I think that you got that message because the recording that was going on couldn't hear you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to speak. Okay, so I understand, like, this is a really difficult situation. So first, what I would say is for protecting yourself, you have to protect your own mind. And one way to do that, I would say, is to build up those forces, that inner forces, through the practice of this right resolution. Again, I'm getting a message. Your speaker is not working properly. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, so build up the forces, the inner strength to deal with that situation through making these, I would say, these daily resolutions. Particularly, I would say the qualities that are useful would be patience, gentleness, and equanimity. So you could make a resolution for those three particular qualities every day, and that's going to build up the strength within yourself to face these difficult and challenging situations. And now you want to know how to deal with this other person. Okay, if you speak to them, you say that sometimes they respond explosively. So you have to, again, it takes a lot of skill and discernment, discretion to know when it's safe to speak to them, because you have to protect yourself, not allowing yourself to be subjected to a stream of verbal abuse. And so if you find an opportunity where you think you can speak in a gentle way that will help to transform that person, then do so. On other occasions, what I would say, and this might seem a little bit odd coming from a Buddhist, but what I would say is almost to pray for that person or to direct loving kindness towards that person with the thought, sort of focusing on the mental image of that person. May this person give up their harmful qualities and develop a mind of gentleness and kindness. And just do that for a few minutes every day. And sometimes, there are sometimes these mysterious connections that can take place. Because I believe that beneath our sort of direct connections, body to body, there's a subtle dimension in which mind can affect mind. And so when you direct beautiful and wholesome thoughts to a person, even a person who seems very angry, explosive, volatile, I think it might have a very subtle transformative effect at this invisible level in which our minds are subtly interconnected. So that is, I think, the best that I could offer. Just try it and experiment and see if it works.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Is everything working okay? Okay, so I just I see, so that is just, okay, we'll just put it in the corner there. Okay, I thought I saw, okay, that hand is gone. So the next will be from Yong.
Bhante,
Yeah.
I thank you. I have a question about the third blessing. puja niyanang. Can you hear
Yeah.
me? Okay.
Yeah.
When you are not in the monastery, is there a way to practice?
Wait, this is not so good. It's better that I stand out because I get then two voices at the same time. Let me just stand out. Okay.
Bhante,
Speak now.
I have a question about the puja niyanang. Are there ways of practicing it when you are not, when I'm not at the monastery?
Wait, I didn't catch the question.
I have a question about the puja niyanang.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that I haven't been to the monastery. Are there ways of practicing when I'm not at the monastery puja?
Okay. Okay.
Well, it's not possible.
No, you don't have to come to the monastery to show reverence to those who are worthy of reverence. You can do especially reverence to the Buddha, to the great disciples, to the great arahats, bodhisattvas, any worthy ones, just in your mind, wherever you're living. Yeah. So don't worry about having to come in person, but just wherever you are, you can practice reverence for those worthy of reverence.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So next will be Linda. Okay, and then I'm going to step out.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is about merit and merit from past lives, creating present circumstances. And I'm just wondering if you could say something about people who, perhaps someone who's born into a country that's constantly at conflict, at war, have really just sort of desperate circumstances, and yet seem very spiritually awake, and how to rectify that and not not misinterpret that, or to become complacent and then think, well, people are, someone is in a desperate situation, well, that's just their karma, or that's just the merit from, the lack of merit.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, I understand the question. Yeah, and I have to say that this is a question that I've somewhat struggled with myself, that when you see people in situations of desperate, oppressive poverty, people around the world suffering from extremes of hunger, people afflicted with war, with violence, you're thinking, is this simply that the result of their past moral transgressions sort of catching up with them? And I have to say that I don't know, and I don't think it's necessarily the case that all misfortunes that come to a person are coming because of, as the ripening of unwholesome karma. It might be, because karma is like one, let us say, one law that operates, but it's not an all sufficient explanation for everything that happens to people. I think that the law of karma is interwoven with other laws, including laws that govern the social, political, and economic domains of our life. And so I don't know that it's necessarily the case that people who are undergoing extreme forms of affliction are doing so as the result of a past unwholesome karma. It might be the case, but maybe not. Let me just clear my throat. In my position has always been that we have to do everything that we can. And I'm going to deal with this more in the last talk of this retreat, but we have to do everything that we can to help those who are facing the kinds of severe, debilitating, oppressive types of suffering in the world. Like this is part of our practice, our responsibility as followers of the Dharma, and not to take this attitude that, well, this is their karma, it doesn't concern me. Because I think part of our challenge is to arouse that great compassionate wish to help to elevate those who are suffering from extreme forms of oppression, affliction, and violence. Yeah, I've always sort of been bordering on the level of being a social revolutionary, even before I became involved with Buddhism. Okay. Okay, so I see another hand. This is Vandana. So let me just jump out. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhante. I just wanted to show my gratitude towards what you said about the resolution, big 3 resolution. And I think that is a very, very practical strategy, which I was also thinking of doing it. That, okay, I have to find my hindrances and my defilements, and one by one, I have to focus on one at a time and then see how I go about it. But you also made it like, okay, now reconfirmed from you. It is, I feel really, really better now that I have to now focus on all the subtle defilements which are coming. So thank you so much. And the one comment I want to make about the person who said that if they can't go to monastery. So I myself, I usually don't go to the monasteries, but whenever I get a chance, I go. But I can do generosity or dana from home. So I send food with the Uber Eats, or I send online donation to my worldwide monks and nuns. So I would just suggest to that person that that is a good way to go about it, showing your gratitude towards our teachers, valuable teachers, including yourself. So I just wanted to make that comment. So thank you so much, Bhante. Very,
Okay.
very.
Okay, so thank you so much. Yeah, so now it's 11:20, and now we'll have to go to the dining hall. You see, we have here, this is a little bit of a difficult situation, that this monastery, it's not specifically a retreat center. So on the weekends, sometimes we get, especially this is Labor Day weekend, there come just casual visitors who want to see an exotic Tang Dynasty Chinese-style monastery in Upper New York State. And there'll be a meal program in the dining hall, which will start at 12 noon. So all of us should go to the dining hall and have our lunch now and be ready to clear the dining hall by 12 noon so that the visitors can come. And then you'll have your after meal work assignments and then a break. And then we come back at 1:40 for another silent meditation. Okay, so we could just stand and we'll do 3 half bows to the Buddha.
Three half bows to the Buddha. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. Bow to Bhante.
Thank you, Bante. Have a good lunch.